Hey everyone, we're back, and today we're at the conclusion of our Hireling series, and we're going to talk about the final 3 Hirelings that come in the Hirelings box. This is actually the Marauder Hireling box, but it's the set that contains the actual physical box that's this big that allows you to contain all of your Hireling stuff. So I've got all of my Hirelings, landmarks, and even the base deck in this box, right? And the white dice that I never use anymore. But when you physically purchase this box, it comes with the final 3 Hirelings that correspond to the Marauder factions. You've got the Flame Bearers, the Vault Keepers, and the Popular Band. And today we're going to cover in depth the promoted and demoted side of these last 3 Hirelings. So, without any further ado, let's begin with the Flame Bearers. The Flame Bearers remind me a little bit of the actual mob tokens from the Lord of the Hundreds faction, but it doesn't use mob tokens. It only uses these 6 warriors that really do look like the Lord of the Hundreds warriors, but as you can see, they kind of look a little bit psychotic with a chip in their ear, very vicious looking, and I think that they're really cool. And the way that they work is that they are a force for mayhem and destruction that's really hard to control. You have to take a lot of these actions. A lot of it is not optional in the same way that other Hirelings are, but they can still be very practical to have. So let's start with the setup instructions. The first thing that you do at the onset of the game is you set up by placing 2 bearer warriors among any clearings, even the same. So whoever is choosing to set up the Flame Bearers is just going to take 2 of these warriors from the supply and put them somewhere on the map. And like it said on the card, you can put them in the same clearing or you can split them up. All right, pretty simple. The next thing that it says is that there is a when hired action. So when you take it from the supply, right, by meeting the victory point threshold, or when another player hands you the hireling, you check this action. And it says, if no bearer warriors are on the map, meaning people have battled them or for whatever reason, there aren't any on the map at the time that you acquire the hireling. If no bearer warriors are on the map, place 2 bearer warriors among any clearings. So you get to basically repeat the setup instructions if there are none on the map when you acquire it. So you would just take 2 from the supply and boom, boom, place them out. This doesn't happen every time you get the hireling, only if you get it and there are none on the map. They've been board wiped, so they have their own built-in little comeback mechanism. Then, whenever you have this hireling, notice that it's a start of birdsong effect, not a daylight effect. So the first thing you do on your turn is you resolve the Flame Bearer effect, or you could buy a card from the Riverfolk or other start of birdsong effects. And it says, in each clearing with any bearer warriors, you must remove 1 enemy piece per bearer warrior there. Warriors first. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to do in your birdsong phase, if you're the controller, is in each clearing with any bearer warriors, so here, 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 and here, you must remove 1 enemy piece per bearer warrior there. Enemies first. So it's almost like each of the bearer warriors has a vagabond crossbow. It works exactly the same where you remove pieces. It's not a battle. They're not hits. You're just removing pieces, but you have to start with the enemies. And you can choose whom you're removing, but you must do it. All right, so let's imagine that I'm some other third faction that's an enemy to the Underground Duchy and the Corvids. So you go 1 by 1 in each clearing. You can do the order however you want, but you have to resolve the entire action first. So in this situation, I would choose, do I want to remove a Underground Duchy warrior or a Corvid warrior? Let's remove the Corvid. Gone. Then we're going to come over here and we're going to remove 2 pieces of the enemy, right? Because we have 2 bearer warriors. So we remove the Corvid and we remove the plot. Now remember that when a hireling action removes pieces, you don't get victory points for it. That's why it's a you must remove. Even if I would decide I'd rather leave that there so that my faction warriors can go in and battle and take the point, in this case, you don't get a choice. You have to remove both pieces. However, interestingly, this was a raid token. Now, does it trigger immediately? No. What happens is you have to complete the entire action before you resolve the effects of the raid. So it would remove the raid, but then you would wait until after all the other removal effects of the bearer warriors are finished before you activate the raid. Then you go over to here, you remove an underground duchy building, which triggers price of failure. And then you remove another one. Well, in this case, because they're all happening simultaneously in a sense, the underground duchy would only have one instance of the price of failure where they have to discard one of the cards from their hand and a minister of highest rank. Now, because they're both being removed at the same time, you only have to do that once. If it were lizard gardens that you're removing, then it's always they discard one card per garden that they lose when you have what's called Fear of the Faithful. But for the Underground Duchy, it's one instance of removal, so they only have to suffer price of failure once. Now I've done all of the removal effects. Now the raid effect activates. So I would not be able to remove the raid and then spawn, and then remove the newly placed corvids using the same effect, right? So remove everything, then do the raid where you have the warriors placed here, here, and here, okay? Then comes the second step of the Start of Birdsong effect. The next one is you must place one bearer warrior at a bearer warrior or adjacent to one. So it functions very similar to a mob where you can't say, oh, I'd rather not place it. No, you have to. So you have to place a bearer warrior either in a clearing that already has one or adjacent to one. So I could put it there or here or here or here if I want, but I can't just go and throw it somewhere totally not adjacent to any of the existing bearer warriors. Okay. The second part of the sentence is if you cannot, like if I cannot place a bearer warrior, place two bearer warriors in any clearings. Well, when would that actually occur? I thought of two, or actually three technically, instances where this would happen. One is if you arrive at that step, right? You didn't just acquire the hirelings, so you don't get the comeback mechanism. You go through the first step. There's no bearer warriors on the map because your enemies might have battled them all away. Then you are at this, you must place one bearer warrior at a bearer warrior or adjacent to one. Since we're at this phase and there's none on the map, then this triggers the if you cannot place two bearer warriors in any clearing. Then you get to do this, okay, well now I get to. So you're gonna hit that comeback mechanism at some point in the turn, probably no matter what. Then another way that this could occur is if you have the keep or corvid snares involved. So let's say the keep is in this corner. I have a bearer warrior here. There happens to be a flipped face-up snare in these two clearings. Well, now I would need to place a warrior, but I can't place it at the keep. I can't place it on the snare, and I can't place it on this other snare. Therefore, I would not be able to place the bearer warrior. I would just place these two somewhere else. Boom, boom. There you go. And the last instance when you would not be able to place the warrior is if all of the bearer warriors were on the map. Then, of course, I can't place any because the supply is empty, so you would just skip it. Okay? And that is how the flame bearers work. For the demoted side, it's Rat Smugglers. It's a very simple ability. So you have this little ability that the controller gets, and it says, any number of times in daylight, you may discard a card with an item in order to move or battle. And in parentheses, you do not need to be able to craft it. This is really cool. This means if in your hand, you've got all these item cards, right? So you've got a sword here, a boot, or a root tea. Then you'd be able to just say, okay, well, I'm in my daylight phase. I'd like to discard this card to take a move. Discard this card to take another move. Discard this card to battle. So you can really amplify your action economy just by discarding a whole bunch of cards. And note, what makes this really interesting is it says you do not need to be able to craft it, meaning it's completely independent from your crafting pieces. You don't have to have any crafting pieces on the map in order to just be able to throw those item cards. All you need to do is have the item cards. In fact, the supply could be totally out. Even if all the items were already crafted, these are still item cards that you could spend to use this ability to take a huge number of potential actions on your turn. So it's a really cool little demoted ability that allows you to make use of cards that at some point in the game might feel completely useless. So very, very nice. I like this a lot. Rat Smugglers. Next up, we have the Vault Keepers, which are of course based on the Keepers in Iron. So you've got the little badger guy down there, and I think that this hireling is really cool because just thematically it adds a little bit of extra flavor. So if you notice on some of the art depicted surrounding the Keepers in Iron and their lore, they always seem to have keys involved. Like the Faithful Retainers have a key around their neck, the Vault Keepers have a little key, and even their meeple, if you look, has a little key around his neck. What's going on? Are these vaults secretive? Are the relics hidden in some type of cave that requires a key in order to open? I don't know what's going on, but let your imaginations run wild. Let's get this guy out of here. So, how do the Vault Keepers work? Well, interestingly, this is the only hireling that actually adds buildings to their clearings. In the last hireling video, we looked at the Sunward Expedition, which is the mole hirelings. They have foothold tokens, which are, of course, tokens that go on the map. And this is the hireling that introduces a type of building called vaults. So they're the Vault Keepers. There's 6 of them, 6 vaults, 6 warriors. Okay. Their setup instructions are pretty simple. At the onset, place 2 keeper warriors and a vault building. Well, come on. In any clearing with an open building slot. Now, this will have been before you do any of the faction setup, so theoretically all the clearings should have an available building slot, but maybe they're just future-proofing, maybe some other expansion's going to have something happen before hirelings, but you would just place the vault building and 2 warriors in any clearing, and that's their setup. Okay. Then, like many, they have a when hired action, so you gain the hireling, and then the instructions are, if no keeper pieces are on the map, so at this point maybe they've been board wiped, place 2 keeper warriors and a vault building in any clearing. Well, okay. If the map doesn't have any keeper pieces, right, vaults or warriors, if it's totally eliminated from the map, I would get to place these 2 right over here, right? Now keep in mind the rule of piece manipulation. I'll have something on the screen right now. One of the golden rules of Root is that whenever you're prompted to place pieces on the map, if ever you're unable to for some reason, you put as much as you possibly can. So for this hireling, whenever you're prompted to place a vault, if you select a clearing that has full building slots, right? Let's say the Marquise de Cat is in play, and both of these 2 building slots are full, you can still say, I choose this clearing, I place the warriors, and oh, I cannot place the vault because the building slots are full, so I just fail to place the piece. Nowhere does it say you must be able to place all of these pieces, so it's a little loophole that you can use to get around placing more vaults on the map. And as you play with this hireling, you'll start to see that sometimes you might not necessarily want too many vaults on the map because you're adding cardboard that your opponents can battle or remove for more victory points. But at the same time, maybe it's clogging up building slots that you want to be able to put your buildings down. Maybe you're the cats or the birds, and you need to constantly seek out more building slots. Well, having 3, 4, 5, 6 of them clogged up with these buildings that you now can't fill in, that might not be helpful to your faction. So just think about that from that perspective, that you don't necessarily have to place the vault unless you're choosing a clearing that has an empty building slot, then you would be prompted to place all of them, okay? Now, after all of that, what is their action? So their once in daylight action is you may place a vault in a clearing with a vault or adjacent to one, okay? So, of course, we either set up or we have the comeback mechanism kicked in. So the first thing you do is you don't have to, but you may place a vault in a clearing with a vault. I can put it in there, or adjacent to one. So I could put that vault here, or here, or here, but let's decide to, let's put it right here. If you cannot, place a warrior and a vault in any clearing. So this would occur, of course, if the keepers were board wiped. So at this stage, there is no clearing that's adjacent to a vault. So then I cannot, and therefore I place a warrior and a vault in any clearing. Again, keeping in mind that if you choose one with all the building slots full, you would only place the warrior. But in this situation, we would place one here and one here. Another instance where you would not be able to, this is a little bit easier than our example with the flame bearers, which involved the keep and 2 snares. In this situation, if let's say this is let's make it easier. If this is the only clearing that has vaults, and this clearing had something in the building slot, and this clearing also had something in the building slot, or had a snare, or some other reason that I couldn't build adjacent, then this would also trigger if you cannot, then place a warrior and a vault in any clearing. So in that situation with full clearings, or unbuildable clearings, then I would be able to place a vault here and a warrior here. And keep in mind, most of the time in Root, when you're building a building, you have to rule that clearing. But in this situation, it just says place a vault. Nowhere in this hireling card does it require you to rule the clearing in order to place the vault. So just a little thing to keep in mind, that this is an exception where you can place buildings without rule. Very nice. And then the second thing that you do after the first little placement of pieces is you may battle in each clearing with a vault. Okay, so if we did that little maneuver that I talked about where we placed a warrior without a vault, then we wouldn't be able to select that clearing to do a battle because there has to be a vault. Think of it like adjacent to a relic where these warriors are really protective of their vaults. Hey, get away, these are our treasures. So they battle in clearings with vaults. So you would be able to do a battle in each clearing that has a vault. So for that reason, maybe you do want to have a couple of clearings that are very defended where you say, okay, I battle here with, of course, the 3 hireling warriors against my enemy. And then here, do the same thing. Keep in mind, if you're battling with just one and you've got some precious vaults, if the enemy has 3 warriors, you are risking that if a 3/3 is rolled and they have 3 warriors defending, they would be able to remove the hireling and 2 hireling buildings to get points. So this is one of those interesting hirelings that's peppering the map with a bunch of potential cardboard points. So be careful about that. All right, so you get to battle at each clearing that has a vault and of course has some warriors because the attacker has to have warriors. The other option, if you choose not to battle, is the second step of the daylight. The other option is you may place a keeper warrior at each vault. So instead of battling, you can say, well, here's a couple of vaults that are all over the map. I'm going to place a warrior at each one. One is going to go here, one is going to go here, and one's going to go here. It looks a lot like a Marquise de Cat recruit action where every individual vault building gets a warrior. So in an instance where there were 2 vaults in the same clearing, because it's at each vault, you get 1 warrior recruited to that clearing per vault that's there. Okay? And if, of course, you run out of warriors, you would get to decide which vaults are going to get the warriors. All right? So that's most of the basics for the vault keepers. A little maneuver that I thought of earlier is something that you can do that's particularly nasty against the Marquise de Cat is you can do this whole thing where you are placing vaults in their areas, and then at the end of your turn, if it's time for you to give up this hireling, you can hand them the hireling after you've put a whole bunch of vaults in their territories, because now the Cats player cannot battle all of these vault keepers because you cannot battle your own hireling. So you've strategically timed giving them the hireling. So they can't battle their own hirelings for victory points for the vaults, and there's no way for them to remove those vaults to gain access to those building slots again. So that's a way that you can kind of use this hireling to stall the game out by messing with both rule, right? You can use rule using the buildings and the warriors to gain control of clearings, as well as clog up building slots and then hand the hireling to someone, making it impossible for them to remove those pieces. It is crazy, right? So all these little interactions between enemy pieces, non-enemy pieces are very critical when you're playing with hirelings. The demoted side is the Badger Bodyguards, and this one is very simple. In battle, you ignore the first hit you take. But in parentheses, this does not combine with other effects that let you ignore the first hit you take. So that means that both as attacker and as defender, you can go around the map doing battles. And right, you would be able to deal 2 hits, assuming you have 2 warriors, and they would be able to deal 2 rolled hits back to you, subtract 1, right? So you ignore the first hit that you would take, which is really nice. It's a nice little defensive buff. But that parenthetical is important. This does not combine with other effects that let you ignore the first hit you take. And at the moment, there's only one effect, and that is the stubborn mood for the Lord of the Hundreds, for the Warlord specifically. This says, in battle with your Warlord, you ignore the first hit you take. So these 2 abilities do not stack. If I'm playing the Lord of the Hundreds, I could choose Stubborn, but if I have the Badger Bodyguards already, then it's redundant. I don't get to ignore 2 hits. Having both of these just means that I get to ignore the first hit in battle. Now, of course, Badger Bodyguards is better because this involves all of the Lord of the Hundreds warriors, whereas Stubborn only protects the Warlord himself or herself. Now, this just means that if you're the Lord of the Hundreds, you can decide to choose any kind of different mood. Maybe you'll be wrathful or relentless, and then you'd get the benefit of that mood on top of having a simulated stubborn. So this is a very nice combative, offensive as well as defensive hireling. But what you might be wondering is, wait a second, how does that interact with the card Armorers from the base deck? Well, Armorer says, in battle, may discard this to ignore all rolled hits. Well, technically your rolled hits happen first, right? So what happens if I have Badger Bodyguards and Armorers and my opponent has Brutal Tactics? So they attack me, they roll a 3, I suppose, 3-1. And they decide to use Brutal Tactics to give me a victory point and deal an extra hit. So now they're at a total of 4 hits. Well, the way that you do it is you tally up all of the rolled hits, then add on the extra hits, and then you apply any type of modifiers after you've tallied up everything. So if I want, I could say, well, I'm going to use my Armorers to knock down your rolled hits to 0. Now we're only dealing with that extra hit from Brutal Tactics, or maybe the Commander, or Wrathful. And at that point, now the first hit that's being applied, the source is an extra hit, meaning you could use Armorers and Badger Bodyguards to render the Brutal Tactics, the extra hit, zilch. Okay? So you would not have to deal any hits in that instance. In that case, the Brutal Tactics player probably won't use Brutal Tactics, but that's how it works. Is don't think of it as, oh, the first hit was technically a rolled hit, so these actually do stack on top of each other because the extra hit would at that point be your first hit. So it does not stack with Stubborn, it does stack with Armorers, okay? And the last hirelings of this round of expansion cycles is the Popular Band. Just look at this little guy. Ugh, I'm getting a bit emotional. The last hireling. So this one is a pink hireling that of course does not correspond to any of the existing factions. So if this hireling is in your game, you don't have to remove any ad set cards for this hireling from your deck. So you theoretically have a wider selection pool of factions. And like the other pink hirelings from the previous box sets, this one has a demoted side that also uses warriors. So there's just going to be a little bit more going on. The board physically, even though we're playing with a demoted side, which I think is pretty cool. So I'm going to break a little bit of tradition, and I'm not going to start with the promoted side. We're going to start with the demoted side, and you'll see why. Okay? So the street band, they're little rascals that are playing music. I think it's fitting that it's a piper, a Pied Piper, if you will, because the passive ability, first of all, they don't have a setup instruction, nor do they have a when hired action. So at the start of the game, you're not going to have any street band warriors on the map. They're all going to be in the supply. But let's start with their passive ability, which is enemies cannot move from a clearing with a band warrior on the same turn they moved into it. So it feels a little bit like a snare, but instead of it being, a bear trap where you now have to bite off your own leg to get away, it's just that they're playing music, and their music is so nice that, an enemy will waltz into the clearing and go, ooh, that's pretty nice. I like that tune. I'm going to stay around for a while. So let's imagine that this warrior is here. That means that if warriors enter into the clearing, or specifically an enemy goes into the clearing, there. Now you cannot move away from that clearing. That warrior is essentially stuck there unless they somehow remove this guy. They remove the musician. Now the effect, the passive effect, is gone, and you can continue moving, right? So the ability of the street band doesn't persist past the removal of the street band warrior. It's as long as he's in there, then if an enemy goes in, they cannot come out. Now this only applies to move. It does not apply to place, replace, or remove, right? So if I am the Marquise de Cat and I have a recruiter in this clearing and I recruit warriors here, I can still leave, right? So even if I place warriors inside, that doesn't count as moving in, right? It's only when your warriors move from one spot, one clearing, to another. And yes, it also applies to the Vagabond. So even though the Vagabond is not a warrior, it just says enemies cannot move from a clearing with a band warrior. So you can slip, whoop, go into that clearing, and then, you're in here for good. You'll have to remove the band warrior if you want to leave. All right? And if you have, if you're the Marquise de Cat and you have a sawmill and it starts generating wood, you can still remove pieces, right? You can still remove your wood tokens to do some kind of build action, provided that you rule that clearing, because that is not a move action. It's only a place and then remove, right? So that would be legal as well. And of course, the Keepers in Iron could move into this clearing, and then if there's a way station that's already there, they could recover, right? They could remove the relic, put it on their board, and score points. Again, because that is not a move action. This only pertains to moving, right? Similar to how snares don't allow you to move out, and the keep does allow you to move in and through, but not place. You have to learn the difference between moving and placing, right? And the one action that you can take with the street band, once per turn in daylight, is place a band warrior in any clearing, okay? So I can place this warrior into a clearing. I can put it anywhere, right? Or I could put it in the same clearing as an existing band warrior in order to make them a bit more sticky. So it's harder for enemies to remove them. They would have to battle and roll at least a 2. Now, a question that comes up fairly often is, well, hold on. Let's say that an enemy already has a warrior in a clearing with band warriors. Could they move in? And then these guys are stuck. But what about this guy? Can this guy move away? Because they technically started in this clearing, so they didn't move in. No. The wording is, enemies cannot move from a clearing with a band warrior on the same turn that they moved in. It is not warrior specific, this individual bird meeple. If you move in, boom, this clearing is now locked. The gates are closed. The concert has started. You are not able to move from this clearing. All right? Unless you somehow, kill the musicians in the middle of the concert. Pretty terrible show. Then you can continue along your merry way. All right? So that is how the street band warriors work. Right? They're just little, like crystal caverns if you've ever played, Clank, it's as soon as you moved in, you're no longer able to do movements. It's a very interesting little mechanism that could block off and impede movement for your opponents. Very nice. And of course, it's only for enemies. So if you decided that you wanted to move through the band, that's fine. You've got your own earplugs for the band. They don't have any sway over you. Now, here's a cool little interaction that I have not heard anybody talk about. If you are the vagabond and you are able to become fully allied with an enemy, right? Let's say that I'm in this clearing with the Eerie and I'm already at friendship level 2. If I aid them 3 cards, I become allied, but we're still enemies. Okay, so we're not doing a coalition with them. We're allied, meaning that I can now force these Eerie warriors to move around. If there's a band warrior here, I could force the Eerie warriors to move in, but now that they've moved in, they cannot move out. So I can continue on my way because this is my hireling and they're not an enemy to me. But the Eerie warriors that have been forced in, they are now stuck. So I could not continue moving them around, even though it's my will, even though it's my turn, because it just says on the same turn they moved into it, not necessarily the enemy's turn that they moved in, right? It could be your own turn. This is a very interesting little thing. I've not seen this happen myself. I was just thinking about it in the abstract sense, but that is how that would be ruled. So if you force an enemy to move into a clearing, then it must be on someone else's turn for them to be able to move out. Unless, of course, you just kill the warrior, freeing the birds, and allow them to go and do their thing. Speaking of forced movement, let's turn the demoted side up to the promoted side, and you'll understand why I started with the demoted side. Now, let's look over here. The passive ability for the popular band is exactly the same. Enemies cannot move from a clearing with a band warrior on the same turn they moved in. So it's the same exact passive ability as the street band. So that part is familiar. And if we fast forward down to the second step of their once in daylight action, it says you may place a band warrior in any clearing, which is almost exactly the same as place a band warrior in any clearing. This just doesn't have the word you may place a band warrior for the demoted side, but keep in mind that hireling actions are always optional. So technically it is still a you may place a band warrior in any clearing. So literally every part of this demoted side of the hireling is represented on the promoted side. But the promoted popular band, so now they've actually gone on tour, they've sold a few albums, now people know who they are, they're willing to travel long distances in order to come see the popular band. I don't know, maybe they're Creed or something. So the setup instructions, they actually, unlike the demoted side, they get setup instructions. And the setup is just place 2 band warriors, each in a different clearing, right? So you can't bunch them up upon setup. So I put 1 here and 1 here. There you go, they're set up. And they also have a when hired action. So when you acquire it, if no band warriors are on the map, at the time you get it, place a band warrior in a clearing with your faction pieces. So let's say that I'm the Woodland Alliance. I would be able to, if I get it and there's no band warriors on the map, I could place this band warrior here alongside my warrior or here alongside my sympathy token, because these are both my faction pieces, right? Not in the clearing with other pieces that you might control, like mercenaries, for example. Those are not your faction pieces. Or other hirelings, not your faction pieces. Only the pieces that literally appear on the back of your faction board. Okay? And for reasons that you'll see in a moment, I'm going to place it alongside this sympathy token. Now, what is the other facet besides a little bit more board presence and recruitment that makes these guys promoted? Well, their once in daylight ability, hold on to your hats, is the first step is choose a clearing with a band warrior. Okay, well, in this case, we'll just choose this clearing. You may force any faction warrior in each adjacent clearing to move into the chosen clearing. Whoa, forced actions are always so insane. So if you're familiar with the card False Orders from the Exiles and Partisans deck, this is like multiple mini false orders, but it's different in a lot of ways. So you can force a faction warrior from each adjacent clearing to come to that concert. So you're playing with amplifiers and you've got posters advertising the venue and whatnot. So you can move warriors that are faction warriors into this clearing. So here in this clearing, there are 3 adjacent clearings. This, you might have thought is a Lord of the Hundreds warrior, but it's actually a flame bear. This is the hireling, right? You cannot force hirelings to ever take actions, right? That's just a general rule of hirelings, is they can only ever take actions as described on their card, right? So you can never force hireling warriors to take actions. So you can, let's say that the badgers are an enemy. I could force this badger warrior to move into this clearing. And of course, because there is a sympathy token here, outrage is triggered. But who pays the cost? Well, whenever you're forcing an enemy to take an action, the game sees it as if they took the action of their own volition, even though it was secretly your choice to have them move. So the Badger player would have to give the Woodland Alliance a supporter card for triggering outrage, even though they would have chosen not to do that. However, even cooler is whenever you are forcing the Badgers, the Keepers in Iron, to move, if they have relics in the clearing, you can force them to move with their relic if you so choose. So now, let's say that there was a whole stack of Badger warriors defending. You are allowed to isolate that one warrior that's moving alongside the relic and then try to pick it off to get the double victory points for killing a relic. Now, of course, you can only ever force one warrior from a clearing to move. So if this were the case, let's move all of these. It's a choice. I could move one Eerie warrior or one Keeper in Iron warrior. And of course, the Vagabond is not a warrior, so you cannot force the Vagabond to take the move. That Vagabond. All right, so in this case, I'm going to move the one Keeper warrior into this clearing, pay that outrage. And now, that Keeper warrior is technically stuck, but then once they start their next turn, of course, it'll be a new turn, and then they're allowed to leave if they so choose. Now, here's an important rule. I actually broke a rule here. Do you notice what it was? It was the rule. Yes, when you are forcing opponents to move, remember what I said, the game reads it as if they were taking that move. But notice the Keepers in Iron does not rule this clearing. Nor does the Keepers in Iron rule this clearing, right? The Woodland Alliance, who's under control, Woodland Alliance rules this clearing. Eerie rules this clearing. So you cannot force the Keepers in Iron to move their warriors. I would have to either move nobody and just choose not to because it's a may action, or I would be able to force a single Eerie warrior into here. And then, of course, the Eerie would pay the outrage. And notice it doesn't say you may force an enemy warrior. It says any faction warrior. So I would also be able to maybe use the effect of the popular band to move my own warrior. If, for example, I wanted to get a free move action to get a warrior mobilized. And now because, of course, they fuse rule, I have one of my faction warriors and one hireling warrior to the Eerie's single warrior. The Woodland Alliance rules this clearing, and now they're able to go over, woohoo, and then do a organize action. So you can use the popular band to move your own warriors to kind of foist them along and get some free move actions, and use it to disrupt your opponents, maybe make them pay some outrage, and do all kinds of outrageous things. It is really cool. Now, you might be thinking, wait a second, do we always have to make sure that the enemies rule in order to force them to move? Yes, with the exception of false orders, right? So remember, when you read the card false orders, it says you may discard this card to force half of an enemy's warriors from any clearing, treating yourself, forget the treating yourself, this has been eroded. And the last thing is ignoring rule. That's why you could use false orders to move this Keeper warrior with the relic if you so choose out there or something, even though they don't rule, because false orders allows you to get around the rule. But the popular band does not. You have to abide by the rule. Okay? And of course, the last step of the popular band after the whole forcing warrior from each clearing, a faction warrior from each clearing adjacent to move into the concert clearing, is that you may place a band warrior in any clearing. We mentioned this earlier, so you could, of course, wow, now it's a duet, or competing concerts. What is this? So yeah, you get to get more and more band warriors on the map, making the whole map a lot stickier and more entangled. I think this is a really powerful, really phenomenally designed hireling, and I'm excited to see more of it in action. And that's it. That is all of the hirelings in the entire game. So we've got all of these 13 amazing promoted hirelings with these cool little abilities, these lovely little meeples, and of course all these demoted sides. We've got so much content to dive into and explore for years to come. And I am so excited to be part of this community. This is a wonderful game with so much to explore and dive into. And there's plenty more to come. I love making these videos. We just hit 3,000 subscribers, which is just amazing. Thank you so much to everyone who's subscribed already. And I'm going to be doing a lot more root stuff in the future. So stick around and thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.